right?
Yeah.
It's so hot. We always try to get here early so I can like cool down because I'm a very.
He runs hot, so.
He runs hot.
Summer is like it's so brutal.
No, it's so hot.
Like
So
what? Yeah, go ahead.
So you say you were in New York. So you did another mural in New York?
Yeah. Did we start?
Yeah, we started.
Yeah, this is.
Oh,
what
cool.
happened.
All right.
Did you guys cut out, or did I just cut out? Testing.
No, you're here.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were in New York. So you did another mural there.
Yeah, I just finished a mural that was at 27th Street and Fifth Avenue. And it was called The Gilded Lady. And it was about 8 stories tall, starting at 5 stories.
Ooh.
It was, yeah, pretty intense.
So how does that work? Like you're like in one of those little lifts, and you're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they put us in what's called a swing stage, which is what they use to like clean windows on skyscrapers, you know? And I've used those a lot around the world, but New York has like the highest, most strict rules for using this kind of equipment. So in order to use that equipment in New York, I had to do like a week-long course to become a suspended scaffolding supervisor.
Really?
And then do another 2-day course to get my OSHA training.
Yeah.
So I have like a backup career as a swing stage supervisor if I need it, which is cool.
I guess you need to be supervisor because you're up there by yourself, right? So if something happens,
in order to operate the swing stage on my own without having some construction guy in there with me, I had to do the course.
Yeah.
And I didn't want anyone else in there except for myself and my painting assistant. So we both had to do the course. It was crazy. And then, you know, we learned so much about the safety and protocols and worst case scenarios and emergencies, you know, how to fix the motors, how to, you know, save your life. We were like, looking at ourselves like, oh man, it's been a few years. We should have known this stuff before. We're like, all right, well, we were in Moscow and they didn't tell us about any of this, you know? So I've used those stages all over the world, you know, from like Korea to Russia to Paris to everywhere. And never had any of the training. They just like throw a lifeline at you in a harness to like, see you later. I'm like, okay, cool. How does it work? They're like, up, down.
right?
All right, I'll figure it out.
Right.
You know, but luckily I'm not afraid of heights at all. So
I was just gonna say, so if you try to do murals and you're afraid of heights, then you're just gonna do like knee walls type of mural.
8 foot tall maximum.
yeah, it can be restricting if you're scared of heights, you know. But for me, I kind of just trust the lifeline, you know. The coolest part of the training I went through for that New York mural was learning all the knots.
Oh, that's
that was
cool.
actually really cool. So like, you know, when you're in a swing stage, you have a harness on, and that's connected to a lifeline, which is independent from the structure. And that lifeline goes up to, you know, a part of the building structure to, you know, save your life. And that particular knot is a bowline hitch. And you have to know how to tie that.
Yeah.
And for insurance purposes, a lot of times they won't tie that. Like the person using it has to tie it.
Oh, interesting.
So now I know how to tie a perfect bowline hitch and a whole bunch of other cool bows and knots.
But you did large scale murals in New York City before, didn't you?
Yeah, but a lot of them were using cherry pickers, like boom lifts, like with an extended arm boom.
Gotcha.
And that's like a whole different kind of business.
I see.
Those are a lot easier, safer, but typically for like, you know, 6 stories and under.
Yeah.
You know,
It's pretty high up there.
So what's the biggest murals you've done?
I think in Seoul, South Korea, it was like 14 stories.
Oh wow.
And I did that with my friend Persway. It was kind of a collaboration. That was pretty fun. And again, no safety training, no safety protocol. You know,
crazy.
Yeah. And one of the stages broke while we were up there. Luckily, we were both in the same stage, and there was another one. So we're like, all right, cool. Let's just hang out and get to know each other until they come to fix the motor. So we're like 9 stories up with this beautiful view. Just, so what was childhood like for you?
Yeah,
right. You know, it's kind of crazy and scary, but I gotta say, there's no greater feeling than making art at that scale.
Yeah.
When you know the literal visual impact it's having on a landscape.
Yeah.
And kind of testing the limits of how you can paint at that scale, and the satisfaction of actually pulling it off. It's unlike anything else in the world. It's unreal.
Are you ever scared that you look at it after you're done and be like, nah, you know what? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. You know, it can look normal to you when you're up on the wall, and then when you get down, the circle's an oval. You know what I mean? Or she's cross-eyed. Or it could be freaky. And on the New York mural that I just did, when I was painting like the portrait of the woman in the mural, it looked good while we were up there. But I told my assistant, like, look, man, if we go down for lunch and she's cross-eyed, we're coming right back up, dude. You know what I mean? I'm not leaving it like that, because that's when someone will take a photo, and that photo will go everywhere. Yeah. So, sometimes we have to have people on the street text us photographs.
Well, okay.
And that helps. I'll call Sally, my manager, and be like, hey, can you send me a photo real quick? I'll look at it and see that line is not straight or whatever it is. And I think that the technical challenges are greater when I'm simplifying the process. So I am trying to be like a aerosol nerd purist, where we're not using any stencils, we're not using any tape, nothing.
So that's what I was wondering. Like all the technical stuff, I was very curious about, because your work is very dynamic and there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's also really, really structured. And so how much pre-planning goes into a piece? Like, do you, I mean, you maybe already answered it, but you don't design the whole thing like in the computer or at a small scale first?
It depends on the client. It depends how anal the client is, because I would rather keep it loose, So when there's like not much oversight, I'll go in with like a really loose plan and just see what happens. But when there's a lot of money on the line, a client wants to know what they're getting. So in those cases, I'll design everything pretty thoroughly in advance, still allowing for, magic to happen when I'm painting. So I'll couch it with the client and be like, look, this is just the jump off point. Once I start spray painting it, it's going to look a lot different.
Yeah.
Because what looks good in Illustrator or Photoshop won't look good at that scale, or certain patterns can't be painted that exact way with that tool. And I'm going to have to like make changes on the spot. There's also something really amazing about spray paint that brings out kind of the painter in me, where things are a little unpredictable, and I don't really know how they're going to turn out. And sometimes that's how like the greatest art happens, when you kind of go on autopilot a little bit and just go with the flow and let your instincts take over. And then, what you ended up painting is a surprise to you too. So that happens a lot. And I want to allow for that to happen, so that it's okay for me to experiment and not have to stick so close to the mock-up that was approved. So we make sure they know, like, look, man, it's not going to look exactly like this. All right.
Have you had problems with this in the past?
No, but almost every one of our clients is a first-time client for a spray painted mural. So we have to educate them about the process all the time. So we have to, manage their expectations. Like, look, what happens on the wall is the special part. So chances are it's going to look a million times better than this mock-up. And the mock-up is, elements built in Illustrator, elements that are like photography and sketches that are clipping masked and put into like a big collage mock-up. That's, very detailed. But I want to be able to discard parts if they're not working or if they don't look right.
So like for elements that are more direct, like quotes of existing things for the mock-up, you'll just take clippings of that actual image or a photograph or something like that. Like, so the mock-up is not, as you're saying, it's not exactly like the final piece.
Yeah.
It's more of just a proof of concept in a way, kind of.
Totally. And like in the piece I did in New York, for example, references a lot of New York history in the Gilded Era, which is like 1890 to 1920-ish. And there's elements in the design where it's like, okay, I just slapped in a photo of the Flatiron Building, right? But I don't know how I'm going to execute painting that. Okay, so right now, the client knows that somehow the Flatiron Building will be in there.
Right.
And then when it came time to painting that particular section,
it was that big.
Right. Well, I had to decide, okay, based on how all the other elements around it turned out, the best execution for this piece is this way or that way. And I ended up kind of like making it up on the spot and doing like a graphic illustrated version of that photo. So it looked like it was built in Illustrator, just two colors, but in the mock-up it was just a photograph.
Right.
So I want to be able to like make those decisions while I'm painting, you know? So there's a part where like the client has no involvement anymore. Once I'm like flying on my own, it's like, whatever has to happen is my choice, man.
Have you ever had a case where they try to like intercede in the middle of it?
All the time.
Really?
Oh yeah. You know, not to throw any clients under the bus, but Johnny Walker, oh my God, God bless them. I loved working with them, but yes, they were at times difficult to work with because my manager is scowling at me right now. Whatever, man. You know, I know your audience are a lot of artists and designers as well. So
They probably won't listen to this. So.
Johnny Walker's not
Yeah.
listening. But, you know, just to give you a good example about what you're asking about, like, you know, they were that client where, you know, we arranged a mural in Bulgaria and designed and approved the image 3 months ahead of time, ordered the specific color palette in the paint order to be shipped from Europe, from Germany all the way to Bulgaria. The day I start painting, they want to add things and change colors. I'm like, guys, we approved it 3 months ago and we shipped the paint. So luckily I was able to like use that as an excuse to be like, no, there's no paint. So, you know, it's amazing what you have to go through sometimes. But, you know, I think for every artist at every stage in their career, you're kind of fighting to maintain the integrity of your work in one way or another. So, you know, when you deal with bigger brands, sometimes you have to pull the card that's like, no, I'm an artist. There's, you know, my integrity at stake, and I refuse to put my name on this if it goes beyond this point.
Yeah.
And I'm never scared to pull that card if I really need to.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I would have assumed someone of your status and reputation, I mean, you've done a bunch of work that the clients would maybe be more hands-off or standing of that, but I guess it still happens.
Yeah, and what happens a lot too is when there's like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, a lot of them need to justify their jobs.
Yeah.
So, you know, these days I 90% of the time am making paintings and painting murals. So I don't do as much kind of brand commercial work as I used to. But, you know, there's been a million times when there's the advertising agency and then there's the client. And the agency will have their comments, and that's separate to the client's comments. So you have like these layers. So you know the client isn't asking for that, but this guy is who needs to like justify his job.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar.
You know what I mean?
We have that situation in architecture where it's like, it's a big, if you're, so one of the clients I had was a bank of China, one of the banks. It's like the worst client to have because there's so many layers of people.
Oh, geez.
And people, they come up with comments and you can tell they don't even mean what they're saying, but they're saying it because they have to say something, right?
Yeah, it's a conference call and they have to speak up.
Yeah. But if you say this, you realize it's an extra week of work for us, but they don't care.
Yeah, so, you know, it's hard to navigate those waters sometimes because I just want to paint what I want to paint.
Yeah.
So, you know, earlier in my career, I didn't really have that luxury, the take it or leave it luxury. Yeah. You know, these days more and more I'm able to be like, look guys, you came to me, I don't really care if this job goes away. So, you know, if I'm going to do it, I'd like to do it this way. Yeah. And a lot of times, you know, I mean, that sounds way more arrogant than it actually ever is. What I really mean is that like when a client comes to me, if I'm interested in doing the job, I don't like how they're approaching it, I'll try to be generous and say, guys, I see what you're trying to do. Here's how I would do it in a way that I think would be really cool and would really speak to my audience and really be like genuine for me.
Right.
You know, or I try to like guide them towards a way of executing the job that would make me really excited. You know, and I would tell them like, guys, if we do it this way, I'm going to be pumped. And then, you know, that enthusiasm leads to quality.
Right.
And I know that deeply, you know.
Yeah.
Before 6-7 years ago, when I committed to my fine art full time, I had a design studio in New York for 10 years called Thunderdog. And I remember the feeling when my enthusiasm was going down, when I stopped caring about the client work as much. And I saw that directly affecting the quality of the work. And that to me was like a big alarm bell. Did not like that. I was not okay with that. So I knew I had to switch things up in my life because I'm not okay with mediocrity, man.
So
scary.
So going back, so like you started graphic artwork and stuff when you were a kid?
I started everything really young, man. I had really creative parents. I was really lucky for that. My mom was an actress.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get better than
Yeah,
that.
I was born on Sunset Boulevard above a hamburger hamlet in like this little birthing clinic in Hollywood. And, you know, my mom was an actress and my dad was like a writer and a photographer. And my mom is British and my dad's from Detroit. And they had this like beautiful love story. They're great parents. They didn't really have a lot of money growing up, but they were like the most loving, supportive parents and loved my art, you know. And I was like a really prolific artist as like a 6-year-old. I was making art all the time, like crazy. And I knew what I wanted to do really early, really early. I knew, and I just wanted everyone out of my way so I could just do it.
Right.
And I got really lucky when I was 18, freshman year in art school. One of my teachers referred me to a guy she knew at Fisher-Price, the toy company. And he was like, hey, yeah, send me your portfolio. Didn't really have one, but I mailed him like something I put together, and he hired me to start doing toy design for them.
Wow.
And
This is before SVA.
yeah.
So, so this phone call to Fisher-Price just kind of happened out of the blue, it sounds like.
Well, my design teacher, I did 2 years of art school in Detroit at Center for Creative Studies, which is like the big automotive design school. But I couldn't afford to go to SVA yet. That's where I really wanted to go. But I figured out that if I did a year in graphic design and a year in fine arts, I'd have the exact credits to transfer as a junior at SVA.
Oh, nice.
Boom. Yeah. So after my year in graphic design, I'm like, guys, I have a change of heart. I want to pay. So I bullshitted my way through that. But in my first year in graphic design, I had a great teacher named Claire Edwards who knew a guy at Fisher-Price in Buffalo, New York. And that's how it started. And it was the coolest thing in the world because, you know, I was 18 years old and I was sending toy designs through the fax machine at Kinko's.
What?
I didn't have a computer. It was 1996, man.
Yeah.
And what I was doing was early conceptualization, you know, so it wasn't like final toy design. It was more like, okay, we have a whole line based on fantasy. So give me sketches on wizards, centaurs, unicorns, pegasuses, trolls, knights. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, cool. Yeah. Here's 30 pages of doodles. Facts.
Wow.
You know, and that relationship went really well. And I eventually ended up designing an actual toy for them for their Rescue Heroes series, which is like these cartoony firemen and cops and stuff. And they were really popular back then.
So wait, so what did you design? What was the actual toy?
He was called Smokey the Fire Dog. And he's like a big Dalmatian. But what I loved about him, they had kind of like graffiti caricatures, like big feet and like really cool cartoony. And that one made it to production almost exactly how I designed it.
Whoa.
Which is really rad.
That's got to be rare also.
Who knows? I don't know. I mean, maybe there's other toy designers who are like just really, you know, fresh out the gate like that too. I don't know. Because it was new to me, and back then I wasn't on the internet, so who knows? But for me, it was like a great lifeline and a great little bit of validation to be like, okay,
That's pretty good.
You're good enough to do that. So in my head, it was like, all right, if I'm good enough to do that, what else can I do? You know, because I don't want to grow up to be a toy designer. Right. You know, I want to grow up to do all kinds of crazy stuff. So this is just like, you know, a good pat in the back to at least prove to my parents and other authority figures in my life to get out of my way. Like, okay, cool. That's, you know, a validation from the universe that he's on the right path. So shut up and get out of his way. And around that age as well, man, I was a busy 18-year-old because I also got a job at a place called the Highway Press, which was Detroit's like premier rock poster silkscreening shop. And it was like the mecca of silkscreen rock posters. It was amazing. And they would print posters for Stanley Mouse, Gary Grimshaw, Mark Arminsky, Derek Hess, Glenn Barr, masters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I was 18, I was like taking their separations and shooting screens from them and printing their posters. And then, you know, before too long, people are coming to me to design posters, and then I'm printing them there myself. So when I was like 18, 19, I got to design some posters for some really cool people like Mixmaster Mike and Munny Mark of the Beastie Boys, and like whoever would come through Detroit for a show.
Right.
I was like, I'll do the poster.
Yeah.
You know, do it for like free and just print it, you know? So that was like the earliest of my graphic design.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I'm like, okay, I have an image. How do I incorporate type into it? I'm going to just draw the type because I don't have a computer.
It's probably better off doing it that way and start.
Yeah. But also it was so analog back then that we're, you know, taking black and white drawings and having Duratrans films made upstairs at the Duratrans company and then shooting the screens. So, you know, it doesn't take very long before you're like, oh, well, whatever is on the screen is what gets shot. I mean, whatever's on the film is what gets shot on the screen. Okay, cool. I'm going to doodle on black and white paper, shoot the film, and then splatter ink on the film, shoot that. And then we were like hand cutting Rubylith, which for, you know, the millennials out there, Rubylith is what us old timers used to use to make color separations by hand. It's like clear red film. And you lay that over your black and white drawing, and you'd razor blade out the shapes for your color. And then you could throw ink on that too and do all these cool experimental things. And I would get to see how the big artists did their separations. And Derek Hess, who I advise anyone listening to this to really look up, who's from Ohio, he had like top secret separations where like no one coming into the shop could see them. We couldn't leave them out.
Really?
And he would take a Rubylith marker and draw on clear plastic inside the figure. And he would have maybe like 7 layers of skin tones. And he would color it with the Rubylith marker and then take a sharp utensil and carve highlights out of that.
Wow.
I mean, really cool, crazy experimental stuff, man. And I was like 18, just soaking it all up, you know? So I was doing that. And then the third job I had at that time was I was the in-house illustrator for a magazine called Orbit. And Orbit was way ahead of its time. It was like a satirical magazine. It was like a grown-up mad magazine that was weekly in Detroit. And it was kind of like a Vice magazine meets, you know, Village Voice kind of vibe. It was newsprint, always had an illustrated cover, and really raunchy articles. And funny bit of a little factoid is Quentin Tarantino in Pulp Fiction, when they go to his house, he's wearing the robe. He's wearing an Orbit magazine T-shirt. You see it in the movie? Yep. It's the mascot is called Orby. And anyway, Orbit was like where a lot of the big artists that I knew and respected from Detroit were doing covers and illustrations, like Glenn Barr, who's done a lot of work for DC Comics and did a lot of the paintings for the Ren and Stimpy cartoon, and is like a master. Yeah, like when they zoom in on the nickel inside the ear, that was a Glenn Barr painting. Also the Funk Dubious album cover, that was painted by Glenn Barr. He was just a master. And then there's people like Niagara, and Tom Thews, and Mark Dancy, these like world-renowned artists who are kind of like in the lowbrow juxtaposed vibe, who are all local. And I would just like bug them and go to their studios and go through their flat files and ask questions.
You're like in the mix. This is your third job you had at the same time?
That's right.
That's crazy.
This is when I was 18, man. I didn't care. I loved it. And, you know, I was excited just to be around all those people.
Yeah.
So Orbit definitely helped kind of grow the seeds in me of, you know, my love for underground culture, rebel art culture. You know, I grew up skateboarding and around graffiti, so that was already in me. And when I got to Orbit, I felt like that mindset was completely not just endorsed, but like encouraged to flourish. Because like the first article I illustrated for them was how to be a better stalker. Okay, and it was like an illustrated guide to being a good stalker.
That's great.
And it was like the stalker daily routine: 6 a.m. call your victim, 6:05 call him back. And it like spawned all this backlash, and like all these radio stations were like calling on boycotts and the advertising of the magazine. And I'm like, dude, are we in trouble? Like, fuck, man, what do we do next? And am I fired? Like, what's happening? He goes, nah, man, here's your next assignment.
Yeah.
And I look at it, it's the Orbit Guide to Suicide. I'm like, bro, step one, location, location, location. If you have an enemy, kill yourself at their house. You know what I mean? It was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
So I found like a community in Detroit when I was a teenager that really helped me kind of define who I was as a person and an artist. And, you know, it helped me like kind of cement my love of underground culture and underground art. And that was like the earliest beginnings of my career. And then, you know, after my sophomore year in art school, I was already doing so much work outside of school that before moving to New York, I decided to kind of milk that and ride that wave for a little longer before discarding it all and moving somewhere new. So I took a year off just to keep doing that kind of work in Detroit.
During school?
No, a year off, not going to school,
Okay.
but doing this commercial work. Because when I was like 18, 19, I was super in demand in Detroit at the time, man. It was a really cool thing. I was doing posters and flyers for all the radio stations and nightclubs and all this stuff. And it was 1990s Detroit when Eminem was coming up and like a lot of cool stuff was happening. And I used to do all the flyers for the Shelter and St. Andrews Hall, which is where the big rap battle happens in 8 Mile, you know?
Yeah.
So it was that era in Detroit. And so it was a cool time to be there and a cool time to be involved.
Did a part of you ever think, I want to just stay here instead of going over to SVA?
I think I would have thought that if I was born and raised there, but I was already a nomad. So, you know, I was born in LA and I lived there till I was 8. And then my family moved to Britain.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was in Britain from when I was 8 years old to 16.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I ended up getting dual citizenship from that, and we lived in West London, and we were skating there. And
What was the skate scene like in London?
Well, we moved there in '85, so there wasn't really one, but there was a lot of skate parks, ironically. But the way it was basically like we had our group of skaters from West London. There was like 12 of us or something. Anywhere in London we'd skate, we'd see other skaters, we're like immediately friends.
Right.
That's what it was like back then. So it was very cool because everyone hated skaters and there weren't a lot of us, you know. And Britain had Rad magazine, which is like our answer to, you know, Thrasher.
Okay.
And it was great, man. It was a really great time to be a skater in London. And, you know, this is the era of like, you know, parents that were like, just leave, go. We don't care where you go. Come back by dinner. Right. And we just go skate the whole city. Huh. It was awesome, man. So I moved to Michigan when I was 16. So I was in Michigan from 16 to 20. So I did like 2 years of high school there, 2 years of college there. And by the time I was 20, I knew it was time to move on. You know, I felt that. I felt like if I stayed there, I'd be repeating myself kind of, you know, because Detroit's a small town. There's not a lot of opportunity there. So I kind of felt like, all right, well, I kind of worked with everyone I wanted to work with, and I don't know what else I could really do here.
Right.
And because I'd lived in other cities already, I knew the world was bigger. Yeah. So, you know, in another universe, I might have stayed there and kicked myself for not leaving, you know. So I ended up moving to New York at 20 and kind of starting from scratch. I did a year at SVA and then couldn't afford to enroll again. So I dropped out early and I'm like, I know how to do this freelancing thing, man. I got this.
No, it didn't happen.
Oh boy. New York's a rough city, man.
It's much bigger than Detroit, I think.
Oh yeah. But I'll tell you, I was in New York 15 years and
that's a long time.
Yeah, I had like 4 or 5 years of like real rough pavement pounding and struggling, you know?
It's a long time.
Yeah, and I told myself when I moved there, the deal I made with myself was this. Anything worth building will take at least 5 years, okay? Give it 5 years. After 5 years, if I'm not happy and things aren't happening, it's okay to move on. It just wasn't your city or whatever. But you got to give it at least 5.
That's a long time to tell yourself at the age of 20 or 22 or whatever it is. I don't think most 20-year-olds think that way.
That's very mature.
Whatever, man. You know, it's New York. And I also was lucky to know a lot of professional artists growing up, like Glenn Barr and these artists that would come across my path. And I knew how long it took to, you know, carve your place in that world. So I wasn't kidding myself with that, but 4 years was, there's 4 years of like being pretty broke in Brooklyn, man, and life kind of sucking hard, until things finally opened up. And then I made like a great life for myself in New York, and my agents are still there, my lawyer's there, and I still have a lot of life in New York. Mm-hmm. And I feel really at home there. And I feel like I earned every little bit of that.
Yeah.
I do.
I'm sure.
So, I feel like New York City will only start being generous to you. And I speak about it like it's a thing, like it's an actual person. But
I
think that's the best way to talk about it.
It feels that way because I would feel like the whole city was my adversary sometimes.
Yeah.
I'd look out at the skyline when I'm broke and everything sucks, and it would feel like it was my enemy, But I noticed that the city only starts really giving to you when the city believes you're not going anywhere. Because it's so transient.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were there for 7 years, and we had heard from a bunch of people that there's like a lot of our friends moved there at the same time, and they're like, you'll see. After 2 years, it's the first wave. After 4 or 5 years, it's another wave. And then if you stay for 8 years, then there's a good chance that you might stay there like forever kind of thing.
Right.
Kind of thing. Which is partially why I think subconsciously we left like right before the 8, as if numbers mean anything. But it is kind of true. And I always felt like when you've been in New York for a while and you meet someone who just moved to New York City,
you're not giving them that job.
It's like, like, how serious are you about being here, though?
Yeah.
Is the city going to eat you up in the first 2 weeks?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And also, there's art directors at magazines and, the people that are in the position to give out art jobs.
Yeah.
When they see that you've been around for a while and you're sticking it out and you're really doing your thing, that's when they start to give to you. And I've been on the other side of that where I'm like, yeah, man, that guy's been doing it for a while. Throw him the bone, I've definitely been on both sides of it. So I've felt that, But yeah, what an amazing feeling to kind of come out on the other side and have New York be something that is an organism you're a part of and can maneuver in and operate in and not be intimidated by, but kind of like know how that machine works and be a part of it. It's a great feeling.
So, but when did that change or transition happen for you? Was there like one big job, or was it just small steps?
It was very, very much so Kidrobot.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So my background in toy design and graffiti came to a head with Kidrobot, the toy company. Mm-hmm. So I met a guy named Paul Budnitz, who was the founder of Kidrobot. And it had only been around for a few months or maybe a year at the most at that time. It was just like a little rinky-dinky website. And he hired me to be an art director for an animated film project. And he had Kidrobot as like a side project. And, my background was, illustration, graffiti, and toy design. So I was kind of like made in a laboratory for this opportunity. And Kidrobot started getting really popular. And Paul was like, forget this movie. Let's make toys. I'm like, cool, let's go. So we started developing Kidrobot, and I'm not sure how much your audience know about like the world of art toys and what we were doing, but
let's assume not a lot.
Okay, so basically, Kidrobot was at the very beginning of this phenomenon of designer toys, where artists were using the toy manufacturing process to create art figures and limited edition sculpture, and making like 50 pieces at a time or 100 pieces and never making them again. And they became extremely sought after, extremely expensive. And Cause, the artist, came out of this phenomenon, and Futura. And there was a lot of artists in Hong Kong and Japan that really started this movement. Mm-hmm. It was called Urban Vinyl. And there's artists in Hong Kong like Michael Lau, Eric So, Jason Sui, and in Japan, Bounty Hunter and Secret Base, who were making the coolest, weirdest toys that didn't look like regular toys. They, had big sneakers and spray cans, or were like super abstract and weird and grown up. Mm-hmm. But they had a cousin who worked at a factory that got them a good deal, and now it's like a rotocast vinyl figure that's just beautiful. And Kidrobot was the first American brand to bring that culture over here. And I designed the main figures for Kidrobot, and I designed the mascot logo for Kidrobot. And the toys that I designed for them are in the MoMA permanent collection now, which is super cool. Yeah. Justifies me dropping out of art school to my mom.
It better.
Yeah, I know. What else does she want? But anyway, so I designed a toy called the Dunny and a toy called the Munny. And they were what's called platform toys. So the idea, it's kind of like a Lego figure where it's like one mold, but it's painted different ways. Mm-hmm. And financially, the business model behind it's actually really cool because you only pay for the tooling and the molds once. And from that point on, you're just paying for the paint jobs or little accessories or whatever. And I was curating the artists for that. So I was calling up all the old school graffiti writers like, yo, man, you guys want to make some toys? Let's go. And I got a lot of artists making toys for the first time. And Kidrobot became this amazing phenomenon where they ended up having a store in Soho on Prince Street, right across from the Apple store. They had a store in San Francisco at Haight Ashbury.
I remember I went there. I was like, those toys are so cool. I can't afford it, but they're so cool.
They're very expensive.
Yeah.
But they ended up having, I think, maybe like 6 or 7 stores around the world at one time. And it was a booming phenomenon and was its own force of art. And that's what got me a fan base. That's what got me out to the world. Mm-hmm. That's what got me a global community of artists to be friends with and in this like global village with. Mm-hmm. And definitely turned my life around. You know, after Kidrobot, I was getting phone calls I was never getting before. You know,
like, now you want me.
Yeah, it was great. You know, like Hasbro called us to get us to consult them on, you know, redesigning Mr. Potato Head and My Little Pony and Alfie and all these, you know, legendary American toy lines.
Did that happen?
Yeah, we redesigned all kinds of toys for them.
Crazy.
You know, wow. And we were able to get involved with all kinds of high-tech, behind-the-scenes toy development that I never would have been qualified for without them thinking I was cool because of Kidrobot. So like, they'd bring me up to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, to where Hasbro headquarters is, and they'd bring us to these like research development rooms where you hide behind a mirror and watch children play with toys.
Oh, that actually exists?
Exists.
Oh, that's super creepy though.
No, it was really cool because you get to see them like just hate certain toys. Like, that's out the window.
Really?
But we were helping them develop all kinds of really cool learning toys. Like there's a toy they're developing that has a color reader. So you hold it up to an object and you push the button and the little toy tells you what color it is.
Oh, cool.
Things like that. And I'm personally colorblind, so I'm like, this is amazing.
You're colorblind?
I'm color deficient, pretty bad.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about that because I
how
don't know how that works. But during the Kidrobot and all this happening, did you guys have any inkling when you decided to drop the movie that it would become so big, or during the process at what point did you realize like this is, you know, pretty wild how successful it's going to become?
It was so contagious. They were so magnetic and interesting, the whole world of those toys and designs, that we never had any question about how popular they were going to be and how much love and energy we had to give to it. Never had any question. The big moment was when we created our own platform toy, because before we made the Dunny, we were collaborating with other toy companies on their toys. So it's like the Kidrobot version of the Quee or this toy or that toy. But once we had our own platform toy, that was a whole different ballgame. And designing that was the big challenge, making it different than the other existing platform toys like the Bear Brick or the Toy to Our Quee or the few other platform toys. We really had to like make a visual statement about how we were different and what our contribution to that kind of culture was. And when I designed the Dunny, I wanted it to be like really organic, sexy forms. I want it to be really cute, but also have some attitude. And I kind of designed it naturally the way I draw. And how it came out, you know, really struck a nerve. And to this day is still selling and really popular and doing great. And you know, Kidrobot just did a big collaboration with the Warhol Foundation, which was like the highlight of my life. and it's continuing to go strong. And then the Munny toy is like the monkey version of the Dunny, and that one always comes blank and is made to encourage people to customize it and paint it. And
I have one of those.
Yeah, you have.
all right,
Yeah, I have one, but
It's still blank. But
it's still blank.
I like them blank.
I don't know what to do. It's like perfect the way it is. If I feel like I do something to it, I'm gonna screw it up. So I just leave it. And it is oddly alluring. Like it's blank, but it does have attitude. The description is very accurate, which would
Thanks.
make total sense. But it sits at. It used to sit at my desk, and I would stare at it. I think I don't know why this is so intriguing. Maybe it's the matte finish. I don't know what it is, but
Well, about the matte finish, there's something about the texture and the material that played into its popularity, where the method of manufacture is soft vinyl, PVC, polyvinyl chloride. And it's the majority of them are rotary cast. So it's like a mold where liquid plastic goes in and centrifugal force pulls the plastic to the outside. And it opens up, as opposed to an injection mold, which is like how Barbies and G.I. Joe guys are made. It's like a big die where they insert it and it's solid.
Right.
So the rotary molds are really cheap. They're super cheap compared to the injection molds. So the cheap approach and the cheap materials ended up kind of defining the aesthetic, which is really cool because it was this kind of like DIY way of making toys, and the cheaper materials, the cheaper molds ended up having this look that was like this matte finish vinyl that ended up becoming like so alluring and sexy, and people just sniff them. It's really cool.
it's true. You do have to smell it. I don't know what it is, but you have to.
Yeah, it smells better than new shoes in a new car, But what I was going to say about the Munny toy that to me is so special, and if this part of that toy is my only legacy, I'd die happy, which is that a lot of people found out they were artists through these toys, and I would get emails from people who were like UPS delivery guys or accountants who found out about them online, started painting them, and then were shocked at how good they were. And then people online were buying their custom toys.
Really?
And then a few years later, they're having big exhibitions. And
That's
that's
crazy.
they track it back to painting my toy.
Wow.
That is the coolest thing in the world and really humbling. It means the world to me that happens.
Yeah.
And also a lot of people became art collectors through these toys.
Yeah.
That's the coolest thing. And then getting to see all the kinds of people that have collaborated on those toys for exhibitions, like a lot of architecture firms, Steuben Glass, this crystal company, was remaking them out of crystal. Like we've seen everything done to them, made every which way with every kind of material, every size you can imagine. So cool. And it's kind of the kind of thing where it's like, okay, it's kind of out of my hands and not really mine anymore.
Right.
My name is in the box and I remember designing it, but outside of that, everyone else has their own ownership over it too. It's pretty cool, man. But
That's really cool.
that changed my life. That turned everything around, and everything else that happened since then was on the wings of that in a lot of ways,
So this happened in New York, and you stuck around in New York for another 10 years or whatever it was.
Yeah, I left Kidrobot a few years in. I quickly saw there wasn't really a long-term place for me there. The owner kind of wanted me to be like the director of toy design. I'm like, man, I'm way more funky than that, dude. I want to do all this other shit, dude. I don't want to just be managing toy production. You crazy? So I started my company Thunderdog so we could get weird. And, I wanted to make toys that even Kidrobot wouldn't make. Really weird and bizarre stuff. But I also wanted to kind of start a bit of a creative agency so that, people are coming to us to do illustration design jobs. But what would happen is my designs and illustrations would then be butchered by the agency they'd pass them off to for the print production or the animation or whatever else. So I wanted to kind of gather a team so that we could handle more of the work ourselves in-house. And I ended up working with a guy named Filth and a guy named Superdo, who are still some very close friends of mine. And we ended up doing a lot of creative direction for a lot of what at the time was like big brands trying to work with urban artists and not knowing how to. So we ended up being like one of the creative agencies in New York that companies would go to do that well. So we'd end up consulting like Adidas or Nike or whoever else on how to like do cool art projects. And we did that for a while. And it was really fun. We did some cool stuff around the world and had a great time doing that. And we were like secretly making toys for brands, you know, like Axe deodorant, for example. You know, like I knew the art director at BBH. And he's like, hey man, we want to make this like armpit toy. That's like an armpit with feet.
What?
Yeah. So we do what's called OEM, which is like, you know, kind of secret manufacturing, you know, and that would fund our weird toys. So I remember the first toy we made like this was this armpit toy. And, you know, I was like still kind of like scrambling to get my own personal factory connections outside of Kidrobot. Huh. And I remember like the guys being very slow to get back to me with factory quotes and the agency breathing down my neck for numbers. So I'm like, guys, in order to get this job, we have to throw them a number and just hope that the factory price is under that.
Oh God, that's
total like crazy
risky.
flying by the seat of your pants kind of thing. So they're like, okay, we want to manufacture 10,000 units of this hairy armpit keychain toy. And I'm like, okay, man, we're looking at like $3.50 per toy. They're like, cool. I'm like, okay. Cross your fingers, you know? And then the quote came back from the factory at like 70 cents a piece. So we're like, yo, we're in business, man. Let's do this, like times 10,000. Yes. So that was like a really positive start to like.
You got lucky though.
We got really lucky. That was the only time I ever did that. But, you know, moving forward, we were able to do secret manufacturing for advertising and have that fund our weird art projects.
What does secret manufacturing mean exactly?
It would mean that our name is not on it.
Oh, okay.
You know, we're producing it for this brand and no one knows you made it, you know? So we did stuff for Nike, we did stuff for Svedka Vodka and all kinds of different brands. And we were just kind of like, you know, experts that were being hired to consult on it and provide our manufacturing process. And it made us look way better to our factories and gave us a lot more sway with our factories. So if I'm making 10,000 units for this client, they don't mind making only 200 pieces of this other weird toy for me as well. So it gave us a lot more sway with our manufacturing. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the weirdest toy that you've designed?
I think the armpit with feet is,
Is there
pretty
something
out
that
there.
tops that?
I designed some weird ones. I mean, I designed the Your Mama toy, which is this pregnant single mother. It came with different babies inside the belly, and it opens up, and you don't know what baby
Oh,
you're
I
getting.
remember that.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Thank you. And she had like huge hairdo that you could switch out,
Yeah.
and it had like graffiti hidden in the hair. She had slippers that came on and off. She was smoking. She came with a baseball bat, and it was a little outrageous. But I remember there was like a big discussion online, like, why is this okay? You know, she's pregnant and she's smoking. Like, what are you trying to say here, Tristan? And I remember the Kidrobot discussion boards used to be lit. All right, it was crazy, and Vanilla Ice was on there. You know, like all these crazy celebrities that got into like toy collecting were on the discussion boards. You know, and these discussions would like flame up. And I got into this conversation late. I didn't realize they're like talking smack on this toy I made for like 2 days. I get into it. I'm like, all right, let me tell you guys what it is. And the concept behind this toy of this like pregnant single mother figurine is that it was inspired by the Venus of Willendorf, the fertility statues.
Right.
And it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek version of like, okay, if New York burns to the ground now in 1,000 years under the ashes, I want this to be the fertility statue of our era. You know what I mean? Yeah. And everyone's like, oh, we totally get that. That's totally rad. Forget everything we said. And, I was into making stuff like that.
Yeah.
We were making toys where, there'd be like a secret item inside the head of each one. We'd only make 100 pieces. Wow. And one of them had, each one had a glass vial of New York rainwater inside each one. There was another one that had, each one of the 100 had a hand-painted bottle cap by Stephen Bliss, the Grand Theft Auto artist. And then Gary Baseman, the amazing artist, did 100 signed prints that were 1 inch by 1 inch. They came in a little Ziploc bag. Fun, weird stuff, man.
Yeah, you guys are just having fun, it sounds like.
Yeah. And what ended up happening was like the toys we were making, we didn't even care if they sold, and a lot of them would sell out, but they ended up becoming kind of promotional pieces for our creative agency. So we were able just to have fun and do whatever we wanted.
So Thunderdog was doing a whole bunch of different stuff, right? Yeah. Almost whatever you guys found would be interesting or fun to do, and whatever opportunities came across your lap. How long? It's not around anymore.
Not anymore, but it was about 10 years. Yeah, and we started in Dumbo, Brooklyn. And that was where my first kind of office studio was. Then we moved to Long Island City, Queens, and then we moved to Williamsburg, and I ended up moving to LA right when I was kind of feeling done with New York. You know, I felt like I wanted a different lifestyle. I want to be able to drive and have some more space and all of that. And around that time, it's so crazy. I mean, when I hear myself talk, my life sounds so random. You know what I mean? It does. But what ended up happening was I got a phone call from a guy named Mike Moon, who is one of the most amazing art director, artist, animators I know in the world. He's now in charge of adult animation at Netflix. He was behind the Love, Death, and Robots series that just came out. But when he reached out to me, he was the head of Disney TV animation. And they were, at that time, developing a bunch of like original programming, right? Not franchises getting like regurgitated, but like original content. So he was reaching out to a bunch of like outsider artists who pitch weirdo, crazy ideas. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I flew out to LA to pitch some random ideas to Disney TV animation, and they loved one of them, hated the other two, but they loved one. And we're like, yeah, we'd like to develop this a little further. I'm like, all right, cool. What does that mean? He's like, well, you take that one sentence, turn it into a paragraph. I'm like, all right, cool. And then they liked that, and they paid me to develop it a little further. And next thing I know, you know, a year and a half went by while I was in New York of developing the content for my own original animated show, never having done that before in my life, but having grown up on anime and grown up on Akira and all this stuff, it was obviously a big dream, but way out of my depth. So I think it was about 2 years total of like developing the Bible for this project, and got to the point where I was ready to leave New York already, and I get this phone call from Mike Moon's secretary, I think it was, and she's like, so Tristan, we want to know, what do you need for your desk? Like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, what kind of computer, what kind of scanner, printer? Wow. I'm like, for what? She's like, for your desk. You know, start talking to me like I'm an idiot. I'm like, can I call you back? So I hang up, and I called my agent, Bernstein and Andrew, great artist reps in New York. And she's like, that means it got greenlit. They just greenlit your show. I'm like, that's how they tell me? That's so backwards, man. So, holy cow. All right, cool. Let's do it. Move out to LA and produce the show. Wow. And I found myself, you know, I felt like, you know, an animal in a zoo, you know, inside Disney, you know, at my own cubicle, and it's crazy. But I was the sole creator, executive producer, and art director on my animated show, which was called Ninja Boombox. And it was the coolest thing in the world. And I learned so much. And ultimately the show died like a year after coming out here, but it got way further than all of us thought it would. And everyone in my life was like, they're gonna kill it. Don't get excited. Right. I'm like, all right, cool, it's gonna die. And then it gets a little further. And, you know, next thing I know, I'm working with Hollywood writers and directors and, you know, managing this project. And it got to the point where we made the pilot in like animatic form and wrote the entire season. And oh boy, I never done anything like that in my life.
I was going to say, because it, you know, some of your previous stuff is very hands-on. It's you at your desk or at the wall or whatever. And for that kind of thing, you must have been collaborating with a giant team of people.
No, really? Surprisingly, it was pretty small. And I had a very versatile background as an artist. Obviously, you know, some of the things I left out was like, you know, I painted motorcycles for a while in New York. I did a lot of crazy stuff just to get by. And years go by, and you're kind of like, all right, I'm pretty confident with my ability to adapt and learn new skills and work with a team and find a way to problem solve. And it's not just all drawing pretty pictures. A lot of it comes down to thinking and writing and big picture creative direction. And, you know, when you get thrown the ball enough, you get comfortable with like, okay, I'm going to make this whole operation from scratch. I'm going to come up with the idea. I'm going to come up with the team. I'm going to come up with how to execute it. And you end up building and breaking down all these productions over the years for different projects that come your way. So you get kind of adapted to that kind of lifestyle.
That's really interesting.
So when this was thrown my way, I felt like I'd already kind of adapted to so many different kinds of creative processes that I wasn't scared to learn on the go.
Right.
But I was very intimidated to work with Hollywood writers, not being a writer. Quickly learned that a lot of them are kind of full of BS, man. A lot of Hollywood writers, I don't know how they're getting by, dude.
In what way?
They're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, man. You know, these like, there's a lot of guys in Hollywood who are career pitchers, who are just pitching and pitching and pitching, like machine gun pitching. Wow. Okay, so they're like, all right, this is kind of hot right now. Let's come up with some ideas that are kind of like that and go around town, pitch them everywhere. And whenever they get hired on one job, run around town and pitch every single network, all their other stuff, because they just got hired on this one job for this one network. And I saw a lot of that in a lot of the writers. And I knew that the reason I was hired was because I wasn't that. It was because I believed in my project so deeply, and it was so me and in my soul, that they were hiring me more than the project itself. Because when they bought that project, they got me, and they got someone who's so dedicated and involved and in love with this idea. It's going to have more roots, more traction, and more legs than this guy who just, you know, pitches whatever's hot that summer, you know. But also really intimidating because, you know, they probably get pitched 1,000 shows a year or double that. So I was very lucky to be in that position, and, you know, definitely scared to fuck it up. But I remember, like, you know, getting used to it at certain times and kind of like gaining confidence because like a new script edit would come in, and, you know, I'd kind of like defer to like the brass above me, like the Disney execs, to like, all right, cool. So what do you guys think? You know, they'd be like, no, Tris, you give your comments first, and then we'll chime in after. I'm like, fuck. All right. And I would give it my best shot.
Right.
And after a while, they're like, yeah, we agree with everything you said.
Interesting.
And I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. And I started to get my grounds, you know? And then I got to the point where I could really trust my gut and believe them that they wanted what I wanted for that show. So I started to kind of really feel my groove, and I learned so much, man. But at the same time, I was still managing my design studio and a bunch of other stuff. And looking back, I wish I just cut everything else out and only did that one thing. But anyway, all the original shows ended up getting thrown out the window around that time. It was kind of around when Star Wars and Marvel came into Disney. So a lot of the stuff coming out of Disney TVA wasn't testing that great. So our project just got thrown out. But the rights reverted back to me, so that's cool. And I was just like shocked that I got so far. Like, you know, I felt like I went to college on their dime. And man, I don't regret any of it. You know, it's so cool. But I'm also pretty intimidated by that whole medium, and I kind of know now that I would never go back into animating or animated storytelling unless it's the only thing I'm doing in my life, because it takes all of you, man.
Because it's so time consuming?
It takes everything you got, all of it, you know? Yeah, it's really, really demanding. But the reward is so huge. And, you know, if your project gets airtime and goes on air, you're now like a whole different level in this world here in LA. And it gives you access and leverage to do so much more. And it taught me that I can be a writer. And that, I think, was like really empowering to like know that. And it made me put more emphasis on the earliest part of my design, which is the thinking and the writing of it. And it kind of solidified suspicions I'd had about philosophies I have in art, where I feel like, you know, all art has to serve the good idea first. And, you know, that concept, that idea is everything. And the medium of choice is secondary. So you have to serve the idea, and what you want to do next is choose the right medium that does justice to the idea.
That's really fascinating. That's really interesting. So, but for your other types of pieces, let's say a mural, is there some kind of an initial idea that comes first in a way?
Well, with that whole context of art execution, that's like a way of thinking of ideas that work for that context.
Okay, sure.
Because there are times when I know I don't want to retrofit every idea I have into one medium or execution.
Sure.
Okay, and that's what I'm kind of getting at, is that it's a shame if you have to take every good idea and carve it out of wood or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, you want to do whatever's necessary to serve that idea. So a lot of my life has been so varied and weird and diverse in all the different kinds of media I've learned and different ways of making art that I've learned. It's been kind of a search in a way. I've been kind of looking for what I'm good at, what I enjoy, and also what makes money and what people like, of course. But there's definitely been like this hunt to it. And at where I am now, I look at that and I think, okay, I have now all these options to execute the idea. So this idea is needed for sculpture or for something animated or for a painting, so that I'm not forcing the medium on the idea.
Right.
And that's become really important when I've paid more attention to the writing, because I can explore the idea itself first.
Right, because the writing is like, it doesn't have anything attached to it necessarily.
Yeah.
The writing is not stating that it has to be a fixed medium or a painting or 3D or 2D or digital or anything. It's just, it's like another way to discuss or explore the idea before figuring out, as you're saying, what medium it should be communicated through.
Yeah, even sketching is jumping the gun, because you're already making it a 2D idea.
Right.
So sometimes I have to let the ideas just be ideas and not really force an execution on it. And, you know, I'm definitely one of those people that has, like, you know, influxes of brainstorms of ideas that are, you know, that come at me rapidly at random times. And I freak out worrying that I'm going to forget them and I have to write them down. But sometimes those ideas aren't meant for right now, and I'll find a place for them 10 years later.
That's interesting.
That's happened a lot. You know, so I've had that happen enough to know that, you know, you don't have to act on every idea right away, because sometimes you don't even know the right place for it yet.
Yeah.
But you can't forget it.
Yeah.
That's most important.
Keep it in your iPhone or your notepad or
Yeah.
I feel like also that's that understanding comes with maybe maturity. I think when you're a younger artist or designer, you have this need to execute everything that's in your head, and sometimes maybe that's when things get forced.
Yeah.
I mean, at least thinking about my own experience, what I've seen in like students and stuff, this happens very often. Like when they're younger students, they have only a handful of projects under their belt, so they think if they have a great idea, they've got to shove it into what they're working on at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you're kind of proving yourself, isn't it? And that's when it's hard.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's like a luxury to already having proven yourself, where people kind of assign more value to what you do than is actually there. Like Banksy, for example.
Right.
Love Banksy, big fan. But a lot of it is, you know, kind of like one-liner, bite-sized bits of art.
Yeah.
That if some art school kid did it, you'd be like, dude, that's kind of cheesy. Like, really, it's a little on the nose. Like, oh no, the corporate oligarchs are coming for us. But when he does it, he has this kind of assumed depth and thought, and there's this kind of common trust in his work where you're like, oh, okay, let's go deeper. Or let's assume depth.
Yeah.
And it might not be there, but that's a luxury some artists can get. Like even like Cause, for example, you know, there's a million street artists out there right now who take like a Bart Simpson and tweak it somehow.
Yeah.
But when he does it, it's like, oh, the deeper meaning of the corrupt capitalistic society, and it's dead now because it has excise. And, you know, you have to prove yourself to the point where people will, you know, trust you and, you know, look for the value and depth in your work. But when you're a young artist, you don't have that. So
that's a weird thing. Like, because of someone's name or because they have proven themselves, they have this. Their everything they produce is made much more valid automatically. It's a weird thing to wrestle with, that idea, because for sure you could have the same exact piece as they're saying, and it just no one would care.
Yeah,
no one would even see it. Like, no one would care.
Yeah, and when you're a young artist, it's so hard because we're all just stumbling around in the dark, man. No one knows what the next best thing to do is. We're all just in the dark, no clue what to do next, So we're all just like trying to figure it out. And, when I was 19, I thought, having a design studio in New York is like, cool, done, I'm over. That's the best thing that could happen in the world. Didn't know how much more there was to all of this. So every young designer has no idea where their path's going to take them. It's kind of a daunting thing, So there's definitely that like need to like take every good idea you have and put it on paper and get it out there to show the world what you could do. But the world changes so fast. Like, I think every 10 years, the landscape for artists is completely different. I mean, when I was 20 years old in New York trying to get work, I was going to magazine stores. I'd open up the magazine of every cool magazine I wanted to work for, look at the masthead, find the name of the art director, call the magazine, set up a time to bring my portfolio, drop it off. I have 10 portfolios, so I could drop it off at 10 different magazines, and then go pick them up. Hopefully.
But we still did that when we moved to New York.
It's so much work.
It's so much work.
It's so much work. And it was during the summer. It's so hot.
I know. It's horrible. And you just hope to bump into the art director when you're there. It's crazy,
Hang
man.
outside the bathroom, like, when he's in the bathroom, maybe we'll wait here.
Yeah, but that's literally the same method that they had during like the Mad Men era in the 60s, dude. You know what I mean? So, that way to like get into the commercial art world didn't change for like 50 years. And then, the internet came around, and, it took a lot of artists a while to figure out how to help their work. And now social media has changed all of that so much. And I'm seeing the change happening quite rapidly, where a lot of artists have big independent followings and are able to sell work directly to their fans and collectors and not really need the gallery system as much anymore. That's really interesting to see. Artists are becoming their own big brands.
Right, because it's just happening through Instagram, basically. Instagram or Twitter, probably Instagram.
Yeah, it's dope. I love it. I'm one of those artists that doesn't like to compete. Like, I like seeing other artists do well, man. I love it. There's enough work to go around. There's enough walls to go around. Like, I really like seeing artists do well. And I love getting to curate projects. I love seeing younger artists do well. And it makes me genuinely really happy to see artists like get a shot and nail it and feel the win from that and then move on from that. I love seeing that happen. So I don't know, man. It's hard to say if artists these days have it easier or harder than I did, because I think that what they have to face in the world to get into a successful life as an artist might be more intimidating than it was for me back then, because it was like it was almost simpler in the 90s. And now it's like, oh my God, you have to do so much. You have to, have your following on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook.
Because of the social medias and technologies.
Yeah, maybe it's intimidating and therefore harder and scarier. And maybe the market's just flooded more than it was back then.
I could see that as being true. I think maybe during your time it was physically more taxing to run around. I mean, that still happens, obviously. But I think the amount of content just in general that's put out there is so much that just to break through to be heard by a small number of people is really difficult. And also I think maybe a lot of younger people now feel like that the success should come very quickly. Because it at least what people think they see is that. Like, oh, wow, they have so many followers, they have successful this or that, and they happen more or less overnight, or we assume they did that happened that way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this kind of expectation for quickness is maybe a new thing.
Yeah. You're probably right about that. I don't know, man. I'm just happy I'm done with that part. I'm very grateful to do what I do, man. I really am. And I feel like I'm 100% of the time just trying not to screw it all up, because I feel so lucky to paint pretty pictures for a living. And, I love doing what I do so much. It feels like robbery sometimes. It does. It feels crazy to paint giant murals and, be able to control the visuals of it and the content and the meaning of it. And, I'm very lucky to do all that stuff. Yeah. And, so you always feel like, all right, is this a bubble that's going to burst? Wait, am I really going to be able to do this forever? When's this train going to
Is your body
stop?
Hurting from doing
I'm getting
all
old. Yeah, I'm 41 now. So the mural work actually is pretty taxing.
But
this year I painted a set of murals for Universal Studios.
we saw it.
In person?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? That's so
we
cool.
went with my sister and we were on the bus that takes you around. I was
that's
like,
actually where the
hey,
idea.
I know that
I
artist.
call you up. You're like, why don't we invite him on?
I was like, that's awesome. Yeah.
That's
It was
so
pretty
cool.
cool.
Well,
yeah.
That was, one of the coolest mural projects I've ever done in my life. And we should probably talk about it a little bit, I guess.
Wow, up to you.
So I got a call from a lady who is the director of the Dark Universe. That's her title. And that's the department of Universal that handles all the monsters, all the movie monsters. Yeah.
That's an awesome title.
It's the coolest title in the world. But, Universal Studios invented the monster movie genre. All right. They made Frankenstein. They made Dracula, Creature from a Black Lagoon, Bride of Frankenstein, all of that stuff, Wolfman. So they asked me to paint a series of murals of those characters in the back lot of Universal Studios, right next to the Back to the Future set and the Psycho House, all that cool stuff. So of course I said yes, and I got to go into the Universal Studios archive and dig through all the old posters and ephemera and movie art for all those films.
Wow.
And that was a real privilege. We're white gloves, spending hours going through everything. And after spending hours going through it all, they're like, we have all this digital. We can email it to you. But really? All right. Well, it's a cool anyway to do it, And they have this secret compound where they have all the art for every film ever made. So we're walking down these hallways of flat files, and I see all these drawers labeled Dune. I go, dude, open that. And they open the drawers, and it's all the original art from Dune.
Wow.
And then the original schematic of the Psycho House, the schematic of the Jaws animatronic.
Wow.
You name it. Just so much beautiful stuff. That was a privilege. And, I'm a big fan of type design and, all the different genres of type design. And monster movie posters had some of the most inventive, creative, beautiful font design in the world. House Industries was some of the best font makers in the world. They even did a whole batch of monster fonts, inspired mostly by these posters from the genre. So I'm like, oh, best believe. I'm taking all this stuff. I'm painting everything. And I was able to kind of create these big collage portraits of all the movie monsters and paint them 5 stories tall. And it kicked my butt. I worked really hard on it. And we were only planning to be there 2 or 3 weeks. And then we found out that the movie lot tour, they wanted to actually make it a permanent fixture of the tour. So now the bus will go by it every day. I'm like, oh shit. Now I got to make it really good. So
I took some close-up pictures.
Okay,
we
good.
never talk about it.
Listen, the thing is with my mural work, I don't paint for Instagram. I paint for real life. I want people to be right up close. I want it to look good up close, man. I do, because I like seeing big mural work and spray paint work, especially up close. In the details, you see all this magic with spray paint. So I cleared my schedule, and the project ended up going for 5 weeks, even though almost 2 weeks of that were rain days. I worked really hard, and I ended up doing too many consecutive days, going 12 hours, and I ended up kind of overextending my calf muscle, and my shoulders and neck were just all put out of whack. And
Yeah, so I was going to ask, what's the typical day like for doing a mural?
well, for me, painting murals, you have to paint with the sun. You know, artificial light can be very deceiving and can really mess with the process, because when I'm doing spray paint portraiture work, there's a lot of like big overspray rendering and fades that happen. And when that paint is wet and you have artificial light, it can give you an incorrect reading of what the paint looks like. So the shines will make it look incorrect. Now you're painting and you can't see what you're painting. It's difficult to paint in anything but sunlight for me when I'm doing portraiture work. So I paint with the sun. And for me, my best hours are like 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And by the time it gets to noon, I feel like it's 4 p.m. But, you know, time flies. And I get more work done in that morning shift than I do for the rest of the day. So,
Because of the sunlight.
well, yeah, you have to work with the sun to paint most accurately. But for some reason, that morning push is when I paint the fastest, I have the most energy, and all the best work comes out. And then I take like a long lunch and then paint from like 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. or depending when the sun goes down. We normally paint when the sun comes up and then stop when it comes down. Unless you're in like Moscow in the summertime and there's like 3 hours of dark, you know, so you can paint till midnight, you know, it's kind of crazy. Same with like Denmark, you know, it's like it gets light at 4 in the morning. It's so weird.
Get to work.
Yeah. But I typically, you know, paint these like big long days, and it feels great because it feels like you put in like an honest day of hard work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with spray paint, there's this beautiful thing about it to me where the unpredictable happens in the execution, where I have this roadmap in the design. I know more or less what I'm going to paint, but in the execution of it, weird things happen. And you kind of, for me with spray paint, I kind of do what it lets me do, I guess. Like, I'm not a full master of it. Like, I'll set out to do something in particular, but I end up doing whatever happens. You know,
Whatever the can is telling you to do.
well,
You mean
it's
like a technical malfunction, like the canvas
Yes.
doesn't work or something?
no, I mean, like, it's so technically difficult working with spray paint that, you know, I might want to paint the face this way, but oh my God, I got lucky and I'm not touching it now. But it's not exactly what I intended to do, but it's good. Moving on. You know, so you end up having to kind of like go with the flow a lot and like kind of like take your victories where you can, because spray paint can be very hard to edit. It can also be very easy to edit. I mean, it's, you know, if I'm painting like pattern vector style work, you know, you can paint black over white, white over black. It's very opaque and you can make edits quite easy. But if I'm painting a face of a recognizable person, it's really easy to like lose the shape, and now the nostril is bigger than you thought it was. You don't know where it was supposed to be, and now you've painted over that area so much it gets overworked, and now it's a mess, and you're in hell.
Does the wind has an impact on the spray paint? that you do?
Sometimes, only if it's really bad. Like 20 to 25 mile an hour wind is a problem, but outside of that, no. But I've had all kinds of other problems, like painting in the desert in Vegas. I found that when I'm doing like big rendering, you know, I have like a huge fat cap that sprays like that big around, and I'll be like 4 feet away from the wall, just, you know, and in that dry heat, I found the paint was drying in midair
Oh, wow.
before it hit the wall. Look at the wall, like, that does not look right, and I swipe it off. Like, crap. Okay, that sucks. So in humid heat, the paint will stay wet in the air and be fine.
Yeah.
But dry heat gives you these technical problems. But I love the alchemy of all that. I love the alchemy of, you know, solving the problems with spray paint and all the different techniques to painting, different effects you can get. And, you know, the varied background of my design, illustration, and creative direction, and all like the fields of study I've had over 20 years. No, it's been like 23 years of making a living off my art, you know, for better or worse. I'm able to kind of pull from all that experience for the varied imagery in my mural work. So the collage nature of my work feeds my kind of love for all these different genres of art that I have studied. So it never gets boring. You know, so I'm painting portraiture for a while, and then I take a break from that. Now I'm painting detailed architecture, and now I'm painting patterns. And then it's a really nice way to spend your day because it doesn't get monotonous.
Yeah.
Do you have to do any prep work on the walls you're painting on before actually painting?
Sometimes. I mean, look, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to it, right? I don't
just doing it.
I don't know, man. 12-hour workday.
Look, man, but I don't like using roller paint. I don't want to have to buff it. I don't want to, have to clean up the rollers and all that stuff. So, my process is just spray paint. I show up and I spray it, throw the can, no cleanup, no carrying heavy buckets. You know what I mean? That's what I mean when I say lazy, man. Like, I just want to show up and squirt spray paint. So ideally, no prep work at all. If it's a brick wall, the background's gonna be brick, But if it's a huge wall, sometimes, you have to have some prep because, we have clients hire us to do like 10-story buildings, and they're paying a lot of money for the insurance, the equipment, everything. So your investment in this mural needs to be protected. So you don't want that mural falling off the wall in 5 years. You want it to be there forever, and you want it to stay. So in some of those cases, we're like, yes, you need to give it a good base of primer. And after we paint the mural, you need a UV coating as well to protect it from the sun.
I was wondering that if, depending on the exposure the mural is facing, if that, of course, impacts the
Big
lifetime,
effect.
right?
Big effect. And I work with a brand called Montana, a spray paint company out of Germany, who are like the Cadillac of spray paint. They're just the best. Beautiful color range, and their color stays strong for a while, man. Like I've gone back to some of my walls a few years later, and it looks like I painted it yesterday. Dope. But pummeled by the sun, it's going to fade. And they say their colors will last like 8 years. But if you give it like a UV coating, that could give it like another 10.
That's a long time.
If it's in the shade, you're good for a long time.
Yeah.
And the universal monster murals, thankfully are shaded all the time.
Yeah.
So those are going to last well. But there's other spray paint brands, which I won't mention, that literally evaporate off the wall, man. Yeah. I did a mural with my good friends Hal and Nazem, who are two of like the most interesting artists in the world. They're two German twins who look like Jason Bourne villains, you know what I mean? Like they're gonna break through the window and try to assassinate you. But they are the most talented artists in the world, and they've painted train lines in every country, and now they paint these beautiful murals. And we did a mural together, and this is years ago, and they were using a particular brand of paint, and they were painting black, white, and red. And a year later, the red was gone.
A year?
Gone. It was a black and white mural now. Oh my God. That's really scary when you put this much hard work into it. Now that I'm getting older and, becoming a little bit of a grumpy old man, I know how much effort these murals are, and I feel like a little more protective of my efforts. So we typically only say yes to projects that are going to kind of like protect the work, be in like as great of a location as possible that's meaningful for that city or neighborhood, and somewhere where this Herculean effort is going to be enjoyed and appreciated, because there's a lot of clients out there that are just not the right person to give that energy to. Sometimes they're a kind of real estate developer who's gentrifying a neighborhood and sees you just as a pawn in their scheme.
Sure.
As opposed to, a client of ours in New York, Kaufman, who have been around for like 100 years in New York, and there's a big part of Manhattan already, where you're kind of like contributing to history. So I feel like I have to pick my battles,
Yeah.
What was your first mural?
Excuse me. Wow, my first mural. Geez, I don't know, man. I used to paint in the streets a lot in Detroit and in Brooklyn, and I felt like all of those were little mini murals, and my background in like illegal street art graffiti shit was, I would tag a lot, and paint characters. Like characters are my thing. I was never like a big letter guy. And that made me like the odd one out of all my friends, but I didn't care. And that was always my thing. And I remember always trying to get permission to do big murals, and it was always really difficult. And the first like serious kind of like mural mission I put together was in Brazil. I went through Brazil, went to Rio, Sao Paulo, and Belo Horizonte, and did murals all throughout Brazil. It was so cool. And that was the first time where I was like, yo, we could get good at just planning mural projects like this, mural tours, you know. It was really cool. And that was like mid 2000s or something. And before that, it was never very deliberate. And even making a living off spray paint wasn't deliberate for me. You know, I never thought I could like realistically make a career out of it, let alone make a career out of selling paintings. That's why I pursued all these other avenues. It was like, okay, I want to paint, but I don't think it's realistic to try to make a living off that. So what do I do in the meantime so I can paint at home or whatever? And, you know, I wouldn't have been able to predict that I'd be making a living just off spray painting right now. It was not my goal. It was just something that I was luckily able to do at the right time, because there's a huge appetite for this kind of public art right now. Like never before in human history. And the way I've always said it is like, you know, graffiti gave birth to a generation of muralists. So right now you have, you know, the appetite for large scale work, people with the budgets and the buildings to let it happen, and artists that are geared up with the tools to paint bigger and faster than ever. So boom, that's happening right now. And it's amazing to see.
I mean, the impact that these kinds of artworks have on a city is majorly significant, because they're so big too. I mean, they define a neighborhood sometimes, it feels like, in New York City, for example.
Absolutely, man. It's fascinating the effect it has on people, you know? And I always have a hard time trying to like quantify the value of public art. And if you could actually like put it into numbers, you know, politicians would give me millions of dollars to do this, you know, but it's really, it's, you know, subjective. It's very hard to do that. But what's really interesting, and I'm not going to be able to cite the exact name of the study, but there was a really cool study about human behavior as affected by external stimuli, where they would have test groups of people take exams in a room. The answers for the exam are on the back of the paper. And they would tell them, okay, you're taking this test, but don't cheat. The answers are on the back. Okay. And they had all these people take the test in this room where there's nothing on the walls. And then they had another group of people take the same test where there's a big eyeball on the wall. Okay.
A big eyeball.
Good luck taking your test with that.
A big eyeball. just an eyeball.
One.
Just one big eye. Okay. And in the presence of that image, no one cheated.
It's so weird.
Really?
Yes. Okay, so that's an example of how visual imagery can affect human behavior. It's amazing. And I thought about that a lot. Like just the presence of eyeballs in our environment might make you litter less, you know?
So what do you think your murals are doing to people who walk by and see it?
Well, I can't say for sure, you know. I can only.
Do you have an idea?
I can only hope, you know. I think it's different for every person, but I think that it depends on the city, it depends on the neighborhood. You know, I think that somewhere like Detroit, where you give a lot of energy to a neighborhood that doesn't get a lot of attention, can make the people that live in that neighborhood feel like they matter. It can give them meaning and give them hope. Boom, straight up. In Paris, it could just become a cool backdrop for cool Instagram photos, be a drop in the bucket, you know, and not have as much impact. But it can inspire people to think bigger. It can remind people of the human ability to change our environment, and, you know, human ingenuity, and, you know, the reminder that like everything around you was designed by someone. You know,
which is insane when you think about it.
It's like easy to forget
every single
that.
Object, everything.
Yeah.
There was a drawing at some point and someone did to make it happen.
Everything.
It's insane,
It's
right?
overwhelming to go into a grocery store and think about that. Every label,
Oh, yeah.
every bottle, every illustration, every logo, every piece of legal text, you know, it's insane. So I hope they can remind people of, the insane ability of human creativity. It's just outrageous what people can do. And you think of like Christo and these crazy sculptural works that span over landscapes. And, how does that inspire people? I don't know. It makes people think bigger and, reminds you that this world is yours. Like, this is our planet and our world.
That's a really interesting thing because, the pieces that you produce are pieces like that. They are in the public sphere and they're created by someone, but they're authored more or less by one person. So you're able to kind of punch through as opposed to, let's say your average building, there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen for that building, which is a lot of times why many of the things around us are maybe not the most interesting, or they end up being mundane or whatever. But with the things that you produce, it's very personal. I mean, you're going right through all of that and connecting with whoever's viewing it.
It doesn't have much more function outside of being something beautiful to look at. I mean, there isn't a secondary function outside of being beautiful or being a work of art. Like with architecture, you have this function that has to be there. And, you have that battle to fight that, we don't have to as much, So there's something to that that's pretty freeing. But, I think that, a lot of times great art doesn't come from a committee. Art isn't a democracy, really. It's a dictatorship, which is a weird way to put it, but it's true, And you have these great artists throughout history that are like, no, this is what I want to paint.
Right.
I think my art should be this. And there's no committee there to decide that, So that's where I think like, great art can happen is when, one person feels something so strongly, they have to let it out. And, do they live in a world that's going to let them do that? Yeah. So, for me, I feel really lucky to be in a position where I'm like, carrying the full weight of the reality of the responsibility of creating large public art. Mm-hmm. And I know it's going to have effect on people. I know people are going to look at it and think about it and hate it or love it. So there's a lot of responsibility to that to factor in. And, I think my approach to it is kind of twofold. I want it to work for the person driving through the roundabout who sees it for 2 seconds. Huh. I want it to have that superficial impact and for that experience to be positive. But I want there to be something more there for someone who wants to spend more time and investigate and explore.
Yeah,
and that's why I think all the intricacy and like details of your murals are fascinating, because you can have that 2-second reading and you can also have that 2-hour reading.
That's what I hope.
Yeah.
And for that 2-second reading, all the illustrative elements become abstract elements, and I want them to function that way. I want the type elements to work as abstract shapes and large, splashes of color and structure. I like when illustrative pieces become abstract pieces.
Right, right. Well, they become something new and different, right? It's not just themselves anymore.
Yeah, that illustrative technique becomes texture, when you see it quickly,
So when did this I guess, style of painting, if you'd call it that, when did that mature or become solidified?
When I look back on it, it feels pretty poetic how it all came together, because it was so perfect for me how I kind of fell into what I'm doing now, because there's some parts of my background that I left out. I had a secret career under another name that no one really knew about.
What?
That was like illegal street shit that was really kind of like hoax and hijinks, like super crazy stuff. Fake street signs, fake products in grocery stores, billboards, like, basically pranking the world visually, It was called Trusto Corp. And
of course
you guys can Google it and check it out. It was just crazy hijinks, man. But I felt like in the landscape of the cities we live in, street art and graffiti is already kind of relegated to a category in our head that's easy to dismiss. Yeah. So you walk through a city, you see graffiti, a lot of people are like, it's graffiti. How many people are really like, oh, look at the graffiti, what's the message? So I felt like, all right, I don't want to be there. where else in the landscape are there messages and visuals that people trust? So I started paying attention to everywhere else in the landscape where there's type and design to infiltrate. And I immediately saw how pervasive street signs are and wanted to go there. So I started...
Like actual street signs, like stop
actual
signs.
street signs, yeah. So I started making fake street signs the same way that the city makes them. I would have like sentences that read through like 5 signs down the pole or whatever, but they'd be on like reflective yellow vinyl.
The whole thing.
Legit.
Wow.
Super legit. I started shipping them to other cities, and people started putting up in other cities too. And we ended up getting on the news a bunch. It was crazy, man. I put up hundreds of these things. And we ended up making fake products and putting them in grocery stores, fake cereal boxes. It was super crazy, high concept stuff.
Just like walking in the grocery store and just opening your jacket and putting up a fake
reverse
cereal box?
shoplifting, yeah. And the barcodes would work. Everything, dude. It was crazy fun.
When was this in the timeline of...
This was leading up to before I moved to LA. So it was maybe like 2008 to 2000.
Oh, it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
I was envisioning
12.
like 20-year-old.
It was like, no. It was like 2008 to 2007 to 2012, 13-ish. So I did like hundreds of crazy illegal street projects and like 3 exhibitions, and that was it. But it was a direct response to getting to work on the Obama campaign, the first one, 2008. So I got to design some posters for him, and seeing the vitriol and darkness that came out in American politics in response to his election made me feel like I really had to get some shit off my chest. And what I got off my chest was very satirical and very kind of sardonic and sarcastic and a little more biting than a lot of my other art. And it was really nice to create this body of work in a vacuum that had to sink or swim on its own without my name attached.
That's interesting.
So it was pretty cool to see how it did without my identity. And that was very fun. So it had its own life. And I could show up to the art show and just hang out with my friends, not have to work, dude. So it was fun, but it exercised a part of my brain that needed work. So I've always been trying to satisfy all the parts of my creative heart that need to sleep well at night. You know, I need to be a painter. I need to be a designer. I need to be a writer. I need to, you know, kind of exercise all my creative muscles. So at this time, at the end of my time in New York, in order to feel satisfied, I had my design studio, I had my personal paintings, and I had Trusto. And Trusto was the more like the advertising design side and like a lot of writing that was just completely satirical, crazy, bonkers shit. And with all those 3 kind of identities at the same time, I felt satisfied, but it was very partitioned.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, okay, I need to get this out. I'm going to create an identity and a box for that. And that's what I kind of had with my personal paintings, my design studio, and this other outlet. Long story short, when I ended up moving to LA, the Disney project died, and I started feeling like I didn't really care about the design work that much anymore at all. And back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, the enthusiasm, you know, leading to quality. Once I knew I didn't care, it scared me, and I knew I had to get out because I would just be doing crap work. And it was around that time that I shut down my design studio and felt like I needed to give back to myself and pursue my personal painting and my like kind of grown-up body of work. And it forced me to look at all the work I was doing and had done and find a way to reconcile it all together.
Through painting.
Through my painting.
Wow, that is daunting.
Yeah.
So that's the result of that, you know, solving that problem is the work I'm doing now, where I literally collaged all the work that I was doing together. So there was, you know, painting work, design, you know, all of it, all put together. So what was so weird for me before this body of work is that I would show my paintings and, you know, be proud of it, but I'd also be like, yeah, but I can think and write too.
Right.
And then I'd show like, you know, like the Trusto work and feel like would love it. I'm like, yeah, but you know, I can paint too.
Yeah.
So it never felt like all of me was represented until I created this body of work. And for the first time in my life, I'd step back and feel like all of me is represented there. And that was the craziest feeling in the world. But that was coupled with a deep dedication to the medium of spray paint as the wings for this work to fly on.
Right.
And I really dedicated myself to bringing everything out in me through spray paint.
Deep
And-
dedication because it took some time, presumably before
Master
Right.
the techniques.
Yeah,
and
I've been
stuff.
using spray paint for 25 years, but there's always this thing where it's like, okay, I know how to do this shit in spray paint, but there's this other stuff I do on canvas that I could never do with spray
Yeah.
paint, or there's this design work that I could do that I could never do with spray paint. But I just didn't try.
Yeah.
So I started exploring my abilities with spray paint while combining all the visual paths that I have into one. And I was able to find a harmony for me as a designer within that design system that really worked and allowed me to tell stories within one silhouette, collaging all these elements together to tell a bigger story, or just to experiment and play as a designer. It was a really rich playground. And I knew that it was the beginning of something I'd explore for a long time, because I'd previously definitely seen my life or career in chapters, kind of like, I'd say, okay, I'm going to give this a shot for a certain amount of time and check back in how I feel about this direction at a later date. I've always felt that, because I've always been kind of exploring what I'm capable of, or trying to figure out who I am as an artist. So you always have to kind of reinvent yourself at a certain point, or if you're not happy with something, switch it up or try harder, or fix what's broken. So I felt like I checked all those boxes when I started this body of work. And around that time, I helped start this street art project in Little Italy in Manhattan. And that was kind of when I put the first flag in the ground with this body of work. And once I created the first few murals in this style, people started calling me and asking me to do more. And boom, off to the races.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I was painting all over.
That's actually how I found out about your art, was walking through Mulberry Street, and I turned around and was like, what the heck, man? First, I've never seen that kind of, street art before. And then in such a street, such a place,
Right.
Yeah.
And then I looked at it, it's like, look how intricate that is. How did the guy even do that? I was really bluffed. I think I had to walk back, take a picture, and
Cool,
then go on my
thank
way.
you.
I was like,
Thank you
this
so
is very
much.
interesting. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And that first piece, the Audrey Hepburn portrait
Yeah.
on Mulberry Street, is my most bootlegged and stolen piece of art, man. I mean, you can buy it outside the Met, you can buy it in the High Line, Union Square, Soho. Everyone's bootlegging that thing. But yeah, wild, man. And it's crazy how right it felt for what I needed to be doing at the time, and how right it still feels. The work I'm doing, it feels like a faucet has been turned on and everything's just
Wow.
pouring out. But that coupled with spray paint, because when I am making canvases, to get this full execution of all these different styles on canvas, I need to freehand spray paint, brush spray paint, silk screen, razor blade, all these different techniques to get this intricate style. On a wall with spray paint, one tool, man. It's the same tool when I'm doing letters to when I'm doing the portrait work. It's the same fucking tool, and there's no changing up. So you have this insane ability to execute every style with one tool, one brush, kind of.
Wow, yeah.
And that's a superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels great. So spray paint is this like a magical tool to me, man. It just opens up everything. And when my my heart opened up into this design system that allowed me to like have this new playground, applying spray paint to that was like the vehicle, man. Right. It like just put it on steroids, because spray paint is the only tool I've ever used that allows me to go unconscious a little bit and forget how I did certain things, or paint something and stand back and be like, I don't know if I could do that again. I don't know how I did that. And that's a really special thing, because once you start getting out of your own way, good art might happen, great art might happen one day, but at least something good's gonna happen.
Right.
So it's the only tool that's allowed me to like get out of my own way like that.
Like a lot of artists, are you ever scared that one day, nothing is gonna come out of the faucet anymore?
No,
that's impossible.
Never.
Okay, good.
No.
Okay,
good
good.
God, no. And that's, I think, something that like, separates the real ones from, the mice from the men, because, I've had a lot of my artwork stolen, ideas copied, and all of that. My toys bootlegged, my paintings copied, all of this.
That's a good sign.
And it doesn't bother me one bit, because I have so much more where that came from. Like, I never worry about that, ever. I don't. I have so much that I want to get to that I don't think I have enough time. Yeah. That's how I feel about life right now, is that like there's not enough time in the world for me to make everything I want to make and get it all out. So I feel like I'm racing time. And, that's kind of a scary thing, I don't want to, have huge regrets. I want to like get to all these like creative endeavors as soon as I can before it's too late. If it's like I'm too old, or everyone dies eventually, so of course everyone runs out of time. But that's something I think about a lot, is like not having enough time to do it all,
especially if the work is so physically taxing, right?
Yeah. But these days I'm definitely working with a lot of vendors that help me with a lot of manufacturing and fabrication. A lot of my studio work is pretty high production value. I'm starting to do a lot more sculpture work right now for public art. So I'm able to work with a lot of like outsourcing, which allows me to simply design and throw it out to, partners. So that's good, because the art creation is less based just on what I do with my own hands. I'm able to outsource more of it these days, which is great, because it's just physically impossible for me to make everything. So as I'm kind of experimenting with my work, I'm figuring out how to fabricate more of it in different ways and experiment, which allows me to kind of like do this design, send it out. Okay, now I can move on to another one, send that out, move on. And we end up managing, 20 to 30 projects at a time, at least, but all in different stages. So you're kind of just like, watering each plant little by little. And, I'm sure you guys know what it's like,
Yeah, so right now, though, you have a studio. So are there a bunch of people there, or?
I have one full-time studio assistant. And then I have a full-time manager who is kind of with me in the eye of the storm and helping me manage everything from, where I look out on things. Because for me, I'm managing a bunch of book projects, a bunch of print projects, mural projects, painting projects, exhibition projects, and then brand projects. All these things that are, only the most important things that I want to do. We say no to a lot. We only want to do the most important, most special projects. And, a lot of the time, those are projects I'm creating myself. So, there's prints that I want to do. I'm not waiting for someone to call me to pay me to do them. I'm going to put my own money into it and publish my own books. And, create stuff from scratch that we want to make.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you're kind of digging your own hole with that stuff.
Well,
You get so busy because of your own fault,
that's why you have a manager to be like, what are you doing?
Exactly right. Yeah. So it takes a lot of production. There's a lot of logistics and boring baloney and paperwork and all that stuff, man, that everyone hates. And I'm trying to, as much as possible, just be making the pretty pictures and, having like the big picture view of what we're doing, bird's eye view of the whole vision and figuring out what we need to do at what stage to bring it to life.
Yeah.
But I bring on people as I need them. So I have, 2 or 3 different assistants who are just for mural work. And they all have different kind of skill sets. So depending on the kind of job or what country it's in, I'll choose someone based on that. And we ramp up. We get bigger and we get smaller based on what we're doing.
Well, if you need help in LA, I can do a monochrome. I'm very good at marketing.
All right.
So what else do you have going on?
Oh, man.
Everything.
Well,
Besides
to be honest,
all of that.
we're taking very seriously printed matter right now, which is really
you brought
exciting.
us a beautiful book.
Oh, yeah.
That's my painting book. But over the last few years, I've worked really hard to develop my audience for my printmaking. And we have like a really cool, loyal fan base for my prints that I sell directly through my site. And we're very lucky. And I've tried to keep it fun and interesting so like the prints aren't boring. They're either like really crazy, like 15 color silk screens, or 3D and they come with 3D glasses.
Oh, whoa.
Or glow in the dark, We try to keep it fun and interesting. And my girlfriend Mila actually manages my whole print department and does all the shipping and receiving and all that stuff. And we've turned that into a pretty cool business that's pretty reliable and fun. But just for fun, we tried making a little magazine. There's a little like zine I wanted to make called Trouble. And it was kind of like a look behind the scenes at like the process behind my work and some of what goes into the work, Sometimes people only see the final mural or the final painting in the gallery. So I want to kind of open up the door a little bit.
Yeah.
So I made this little book called Trouble, and it's a little hardback magazine. And we made 500, and we put 300 on my site, and they sold out like within an hour.
Wow.
So we're like, okay, I guess we're making magazines now. Cool. So, that's new. So we're working on Trouble issue 2 right now.
That's awesome.
Which is very exciting. But I found a printer myself in China who's great, and they deliver for us really well. And, we're self-publishing. I haven't had great experiences working with publishers. Mm-hmm. My approach has always been DIY. We have a team that manages stuff really well. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We have our audience direct.
Yeah.
Screw them.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. I love that part of my life. The printed matter is really fun. And then sculpture is next. I have this like fan base from my Kidrobot days, and I have a fan base from like my mural work and public art.
Yeah.
And I haven't really combined those two worlds and brought my painting style into 3D yet for public sculpture. So that's what we're working on now, and it's difficult.
That's gotta be cool.
It's difficult, man.
Yeah.
It's really detailed work, and I'm so picky with that kind of stuff that it's been hard to find the right sculptors, but I've found them now. I've found the best guys. So now we're like right at the beginning where I don't have enough time to design all the sculptures that have opportunities. So I have invitations to create pieces for certain opportunities and not enough time to design all of them. So I'm kind of at that point where it's like, holy shit, I need to just sit down and design a million things and send them out into the world. So, a little overwhelming sometimes, but, so grateful to be doing this kind of work. I know that I have to cherish it, take care of it, and pay it forward. So I try to help as many other artists as I can and try to create like a good community around what I'm doing as much as possible. And I don't know, man, just try not to screw it all up.
Well, this has been just super amazing. I think hearing the story and some of the technical things of the spray painting, which I was very curious about. and the positivity and your philosophy about all of your life and how everything's coming together in a way. I think it's really great, and I'm so glad you came on the show. Yeah, this
Yeah,
was
thanks
awesome.
for time.
Well, you know, I tend to ramble, so I guess this is a good place to do that.
Yeah, it's perfect.
I
Yeah,
hope,
absolutely.
Yeah, we love to ramble.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
Well, it was really nice chatting with you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
This is really
absolutely.
cool.
Thanks for coming.
Cool, dude. Thank you so
translation
much. That was a
from-
great chat.
Thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of the Midnight Charette, and shout out to our guest Tristan Eaton for coming along, and Sally for coming along as well, for keeping him out of trouble and scheduling all of these things too. We're really glad we were able to have him on because he's crazy busy. And thanks you for listening. It means a lot that you've listened to this episode, and hopefully you will listen to future ones. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. These are my hands.
Just
my
stop
hands.
clapping.
Yeah, I'm excited. Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher. We're pretty much everywhere, anywhere that you can find podcasts. If you
Go check in your closet when you're closet.
if you like what we're doing, leave us a review. That means a lot to us. Subscribe and reach out to us. Right?
Yeah, reach out. And you know what? We have the hotline. You can, leave us
That's right.
voicemail.
We have the hotline. I forgot. Yeah.
Leave us a voicemail so we can play you in our next recording.
And the
that would be amazing.
hotline is
Tell your mom.
213-222-6950. Call it. It goes straight to voicemail. Comments, questions, feedbacks, whatever. Drop us a line and we can get that dialogue going.
And we've actually got few inquiries from listeners abroad outside of the US who might be a little hesitant on calling because of cost, right? So you can also just text that number and we'll get it.
And of course, we have an email address. It's hello@midnightcharette. Our website is midnightcharette.com. And we have all of our previous episodes, video clips, and other things on there. So check that out. Again, we really appreciate that you're listening, and we'll talk to you again next week or sooner. Actually, sooner, because we did a review of the Joker movie. Ooh. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. It's very interesting because you feel like everything kind of happened somehow at the right time in your life and like kind of built you up to where you are now, which I think is
But it's
fascinating.
always peaks and valleys too, and it's like every time it's like a low point, you don't know if there's a high point next.
Yeah.
But for me, what I found is that like every low point has kind of kicked me into a better high point that I couldn't have predicted, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, I've ended up, working in so many fields that it's pretty privileged to have
that's
worked
really
in
cool.
all those
That's pretty
fields.
awesome.
And I feel really grateful for that. Yeah. I can command all of those tools, It's great, man. It's like, that's where you need to be if, you really want to do this shit,